if you've got a Bible this morning, and I hope that you do, go ahead and grab it. We're going to be in the Gospel of Mark chapter 5. As I said, we've been exploring together the miracles of Jesus, the significance of these miracles. Jesus looked at the religious folks of his day and said to them, "You crooked and perverse people, crooked and unfaithful people, you're always looking for some miraculous wonder, some significant sign, and because of that, you get caught up in the temporal. You get caught up in what's going on right now. And that's what makes you crooked, and that's what makes you unfaithful, because what is straight and what is faithful is to realize that I am the sign, that I am the miraculous gift, and that all that I do, miraculously speaking, in my day and in the ages to come will always be a reference point or an illustration of who I am and what I have come to do for my people." And so that's what we're exploring. And we're in the 4th week of 8 weeks exploring the miracles of Jesus from the Gospel of Mark this summer. And today we come upon a story that I think is just absolutely critical to our understanding, to our lives as Christians, as Christ followers. Vince, who prayed for us to kick us off this morning and pray right before the sermon, he's one of our pastors, and he was asking me yesterday, he said, does the sermon come together quickly every week? And I said, a lot of weeks it does come together quickly, but this week it did not. I had to really kind of just stew in it and think through it. I began to cross-reference and study Jewish history. And as it began to come together, something significant for me happened, and hopefully I can communicate that with you guys this morning so that we can find incredible, immense comfort in a single, solitary, alienated lady that Jesus encounters in Mark chapter 5. So when I was a teenager, I was, a lot of you guys know this already, but I grew up Baptist, and not like the cool, fun Baptist that exists today. Like the 1980s, pre-tribulational Left Behind Baptist. Everything was serious, King James only. And we just did not have a lot of fun. Church people didn't have a lot of fun. And Adam, who's our drummer up here, he and my brother Nate and I, we would convene as teenagers every weekend, and we would have just so much fun. Going to Taco Bell, going to the movie theater, and going to Blockbuster. And if you're like under the age of, 30, that's a store that used to exist where you would go and like rent movies before streaming became a thing. And we would go to Blockbuster and we would rent movies that are relatively harmless now in my estimation, but to us it was intensely scandalous in that day. And one of my favorite movies that we rented, popped in and watched, was a movie, I think it was created in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, called The Ghost in the Darkness. It starred Val Kilmer and Michael Douglas, and it's based upon this true story that occurred in 1898. Great Britain ruled Africa, most of Africa, and they're building railways to connect the major ports and cities of the British Empire across Africa. And so they have employed engineers, and one of the engineers who's brought in a particularly treacherous part of Savo, Kenya, is an engineer by the name of John Henry Patterson. And he oversees a bridge that is being built, a trestle that's being built across a canyon, and it is a monstrous task, and he has thousands of workers at his disposal. But shortly after his arrival and all the work that's going on, the foreman turns up mutilated, ripped apart one morning in the center of this camp. And so the movie kind of loosely tracks the story, but in the true depiction of this movie, what happened is they discovered that very, very rare, hardly ever happens, that 2 male lions, one a light-colored coat, one a dark-colored coat, that the natives and the workers began to call the ghost in the darkness, were attacking villagers, were attacking workers, and at times were killing them to eat and devour, at times were killing them for sports. And this was happening on a routine basis, sometimes multiple killings per night as they would infiltrate this camp. And so as you can imagine, the workers were so freaked out, so consumed with anxiety and oppressive fear that by the hundreds, they began to leave the camp. Making money didn't matter to them in the face of this terror. Their contracts, if they existed, did not matter to them with this impending fear. And so they're taking off, and Patterson realized the only way to save this expedition and to complete the building of the bridge was to alleviate the fear that consumed the camp by capturing and killing these two lions. And the lions ended up incredibly intelligent. He was able to track down one, ensnare them, and kill them. The other one, it took months of tracking. And finally, he brought the two carcasses into camp and showed them before the hundreds and thousands of workers who remained. And instantly, according to his biographical sketch of the story, instantly the fear dissipated and the service resumed. And this is just one story of 1898 in Tsavo, Kenya, with the ghost in the darkness, these two male lions, and the fear that spread that reminds us of this fear that has always run rampant from age to age across the history of humanity. And as Christians, we are not immune to this. Maybe you could argue we should be, 2 Timothy 1:7, but we're just not. And I think the greatest fear, the fear that kind of presides over all other anxieties and fears, if we're really thinking about what remains, what matters, is a fear that persists, that nags at us, even as Christians, even redeemed, forgiven, a fear in my heart and your heart, our souls, that says, what does God really think of me? I know I am a colossal disappointment. Now, some of us are not going to admit that because we're Americans and we're social media attuned. But I know that before God, the righteous one, the Holy One, I am frustrating, I am disappointing, I'm infuriating. What can I do? What does he really think about me? How does he really feel about me? And it's stories like this that come back to us to remind us this morning, that give us comfort, that land like a warm blanket, like a medicinal salve upon our souls. So, we already heard it from Katz. The context of Mark chapter 5 is that Jesus has calmed the storm, looked out of the tempest, peace be still. He's landed on Gentile shores in the Decapolis last week for just a few minutes. I mean, he literally spends just a few minutes on Gentile shores on the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee, cast out demons into swine, showing his power, showing his mercy, then proclaims to this demon-possessed man, go and spread the word. And we're going to get more into that in the weeks to come about how he actually spread the word to the power of the Spirit. This word of mercy I got from the Lord, what I did not deserve, his benevolent grace. And then Jesus gets back in the boat. He makes his way back across the Sea of Galilee, some 8 miles wide, lands probably near Capernaum. And when he lands at Capernaum, and we're going to look at this next week, but a synagogue leader named Jairus comes up to him, rushes up to him. This man, just so we're clear, because this is important for the context of the story, this man has everything going for him. He is a synagogue ruler. He is respected among the people. He is the elite in society. We're not used to this in our day, but religiosity and spirituality came with monetary possession in that day. So he is wealthy, he is astute, he is intelligent, and he's got a little girl, a sweet, innocent, beautiful little girl. Jesus, she has fallen ill to the point of death. She's about to die. Please, I know if you'll come, you can save her. And so Jesus begins his trek toward Jairus' house and the ailing little girl. And that's where we pick up on the story here. Verse number 25, chapter 5 of Mark. Now a woman, and everything that's written is in juxtaposition, if we're paying attention, to Jairus. Here's a man. This is a patriarchal society, if ever there were one. The men are esteemed, women's reputation, their testimony is not even permissible in a court of law. That's how much disrespect. Animals oftentimes were respected more than women. And so you have Jairus, very respected. You have the woman in that society in that day, not respected, not important, not esteemed. A woman suffering from bleeding for 12 years. So there's been much speculation among scholars and commentators on what was her condition. Most of them have made the observation or reached the conclusion that it's some type of continual menstrual bleeding where she can live, but she is suffering here. She's dealing with blood loss continually. She's dealing with fatigue continually. This woman, there's certain observations we can make about this woman from the story, and the first here is that she's diseased. Like, she's diseased, and not only is she diseased, but because she is diseased, that she's unclean. She's discarded by society. When a woman, it's very clear in the Torah, when a woman is on her menstrual cycle, she is impure. She's unclean. She's not able to enter into worship. She's not able to be around the community for 10 days. So a third of the month, this is her condition. But for this lady, for 12 years, she's had no human contact. I mean, not only can she not go into the synagogue to worship, she can't be around her family. She can't be around friends. No one has touched her. No one has hugged her. No one has been with her. So you have this diseased woman who is also defiled. And it says here in the text, it's been going on for 12 years, and she has sought out so many doctors. Luke, who's a physician, writes about this in the Gospel of Luke, and says the doctors, and that's what Mark says here as well, the doctors had only made things worse. They've only increased, and she is depleted. So don't miss this. This woman comes to Jesus in the crowd surrounding him, this crowd, this crooked and perverse crowd looking for a miracle. And this woman is diseased, and she is discarded. She's an outcast. And this woman is desperate, but she's depleted. She has no hope. She has no financial resources left. She can't even work a real job. She is cut off from the community of faith. She has nothing in the world. She is the exact opposite of Jairus, a man who has everything, a woman who has nothing. And we have to stop there. As we read the story, we have to pause for just a second, and like we did with the demoniac, we have to see ourselves in the story. That's why it's here. Why is this recorded for us? Of all the things that happen in Jesus' life, we just get bits and pieces of them. Why is this here? She's been bleeding for 12 years. She had endured much under many doctors, verse 24. She had spent everything she had, and was not helped at all. On the contrary, she became worse. Having heard about Yeshua, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his clothes. She's so desperate. Maybe if I can get to this peasant Galilean rabbi and touch his clothes, maybe something will happen. I don't know what else to do. I don't know where else to go. When we think about diseased and unclean, disgraced and depleted and desperate, if we're tracking, we began to see the plight of humanity in this woman, spiritually so. Like there's a disease that exists. I was watching, I know some of you, I've been asked to please not talk about golf very much, and so I try to save it for certain moments, but some of you along with me were watching the US Open last week. It's the hardest golf tournament in the world. It was at one of the hardest golf courses on planet Earth at Oakmont Country Club in Pennsylvania. And the tournament is so hard that it frustrates and humbles the greatest golfers who exist today. And one of them, I won't mention his name, but one of them has a pretty bad reputation already on the PGA Tour for his outburst of anger and his mistreatment of fans. And he shot one over the cut line. Basically, the cut line is if you're inside of that, you get to play on the weekend. If you're outside of that, you miss it, you go home. And he shot one over that, and he was so infuriated at the course that he went into this 120-year-old country club and destroyed these ancient antique lockers. And the fans rose up. This guy, I agreed with them actually, this guy should be banned from ever playing at this country club. This guy should be punished by the PGA Tour. And what does the guy say? The golfer says, hey, I'm sorry. Let's just pretend like it never happened. Can everybody stop talking about this? Can we just talk about the next tournament? Can we just forget this happened? And as I see this story this week on ESPN and I read the threads and I see the infuriation of the golfers, what I'm reminded of is that we all, this golfer and all of us, have a disease. There is transgression, there is reactionary anger, there is sin, missing the mark, and then there are all types of excuses and shifting of the blame for why we did what we did. And can't we just forget that this ever happened? Just trust me again. That's the disease that runs rampant. And what happens? We run, if we're astute, we run to our, quote, doctors, our medicine, our coping mechanisms to get through the day. And at the end of the day, we find out that we're actually worse off than we were at the beginning. And this past Christmas, I was thinking about this week, kind of chuckling at myself because we have a husky. Some of you have met Mozart. He's a woolly coat husky, and he is gray and black. And on our Christmas tree, our family Christmas tree, before we got him, we got this little white wolf from somewhere we had traveled. And so this little white wolf is hanging from the Christmas tree. And Danielle said something like, we should get a Mozart ornament. We're all decorating the tree in November because that's what we do, because we're real Christmas Christian people. And so 1st of November, we're decorating the tree. And I go, we don't need to buy a Mozart ornament. We have this wolf right here. I will make it into Mozart. And so I got a black Sharpie, and I began to draw on this white wolf. And my children, who were 6 and 8 and 10 at the time, look at it and call it an abomination. It's even worse than before. It doesn't look anything like him. You tried your best, Dad. Good job. Good for you. Danielle literally was like, hey, that's going on the back of the tree, the part that faces the wall. And we're not even putting that up. Now, I know that there's some trivial issues or items in our life, and maybe some rather significant items that when we work on them, we actually somehow come out better than we were before. But oftentimes, all of our work and all of our effort actually leads us to a place that is more deplorable than we were before. And that is particularly true with all of our efforts to bring our souls into right standing before God. So the woman stands as an illustration of us. I have gone everywhere. I have tried everything. I have paid all of my money to make myself clean. And I'm even worse than I was before. And now we see Jesus. How does he respond to this diseased, depleted, desperate, disgraced woman? Ready? This is what it says. She said, if I just touch his clothes, I'll be made well. Verse 29, instantly her flow of blood ceased, and she sensed in her body that she was healed of her affliction. Immediately, you see this kind of language all throughout Mark. Instantly, immediately, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. This is bizarre. It's almost humorous. He steps up on the bow of the boat and looks out at nature and says, stop, be quiet, and power doesn't go out of him. He looks into the face of a demoniac, a man filled with a legion of demons, and says, go into the pigs and be drowned in the sea, and no power goes out of him. One unclean, diseased woman touches the hem of his robes, and power goes out of him. Like, how is this significant? Why is it significant? And immediately Jesus realized that power had gone out from him, and he turned around in the crowd and said, who touched my clothes? And his disciples are like, everyone. Everybody touched you. Like, we've been touching you, the crowds have been touching you, you're brushed up against everybody, we're traveling down this narrow road. What do you mean, who touched you? It's fascinating. I mean, I actually see here, this is one of those moments that should really grip us, that Jesus is unhurried. I love this. He's unhurried by all the social expectations. You've got a synagogue ruler who is recognizing the miraculous nature of Jesus and is saying to him, hey, come to my house. There are professional mourners there, literally. There is quite the audience who's going to spread the word about you if you heal my daughter, and you would think any of us would be rushing to substantiate the claims that I am Messiah. I have come for the broken house, the beat up house of Israel. And Jesus seems completely unhurried. Almost to the point of malpractice. Like you have a little girl dying, you alone can heal them, and you're just leisurely taking, and you stop in this crowd and you turn around. You should be laser focused on where you need to go, Jesus. Like, listen to me, I know best. You need to hurry. That's the American way. That's the human way. You need to rush. And Jesus instead turns around and says, who touched me? And Mark is all about the gestures of Jesus. You see here in the text, he says he began to look around. Why would he even care? Well, I think the obvious answer is found in the rest of Scripture. You don't find God rushing. You don't find Jesus rushing. You don't find him in a hurry except for one exception. And it is when he is intense, he rushes to show just how much he accepts and adores and affirms those who come to him in faith. It's the only time he rushes. It's the only time he's in a hurry. Been reading this book throughout the year, You Are the Beloved by Henry Nouwen. And I don't agree with everything that he has to say, but some of his views and glimpses on the affection, the deep, affirming, accepting affection of God for us as sinners, clothed in Christ by faith, it's really riveting. And I read this past week. He says this, compassion lies at the heart of our, I read that this week, but this is the other one. Our true challenge, this is entitled God's Acceptance of Us is Unlimited. Our true challenge is to return to the center, to the heart, and to find there the gentle voice that speaks to us and affirms us in a way no human voice ever could. The basis of all ministry is the experience of God's unlimited and unlimiting acceptance of us as beloved children. An acceptance so full, so total, and all-embracing that it sets us free from our compulsion to be seen, praised, and admired, and frees us for Christ, who leads us on the road of service. He goes on to say this experience of God's acceptance frees us from our needy self and thus creates new space where we can pay selfless attention to others. This new freedom in Christ allows us to move in the world uninhibited by our compulsions and to act creatively even when we are laughed at and rejected, even when our words and actions lead us to death. What he's touching on here is the reality that self-consumption, that I have to be accepted, that I have to be affirmed, that people have to recognize my worth, it leads us to a type of slavery, to a form of death. And when we realize, as the woman does here, that God only rushes, that he only hurries to remind us again and again and again that he has fully accepted us, completely affirms us by faith in Christ. There's a liberation now, argues, a liberation that occurs. Like if you've ever been around people, and I'm sure you have because you can just look in the mirror for this, but if you've ever been around people who are completely self-absorbed, because that's where we live at times, all of us, you know that in that self-absorption, we make very broken, very ill-sufficient servants. And it's only when we rest in a righteousness not our own, and an acceptance of God, an adoration that he loves us. He has deep felt affection for us, unwavering allegiance to us, that we are actually freed to serve, to not be self-focused, but to be others-focused. And so this is what we see of the woman here, that she is diseased and she is depleted and she is desperate and she is outcast, and that Jesus is unhurried in his pursuits of finding her and seeing her. He is not rushed. He only moves quickly to affirm and to show his adoration, his affection, his acceptance of her. And a second thing that can join to this is that Jesus not only is unhurried by these social expectations that exist, but he's also unconcerned with the social expectations. Like, they don't bother him. It's not a issue in his mind. Obviously, one of the things I'll never forget is my little girl, Evie. A lot of you know her, 8 years old. And she is the apple of daddy's eye, and she has me wrapped around her finger, and I'm her favorite person in the world, bar none. And she loves me, and I love her. And this bond formed when she was a little kid, like just a baby. She was diagnosed while still in the womb with AVSD, a significant heart defect. And so when she was born, I spent nights cradling her, and she would fall asleep on my chest, and there was this unbreakable bond. And then at 6 months old, she had to gain enough weight to be taken in for open heart surgery. At 6 months old, just a tiny little baby. And I remember the morning came, we were staying, Danielle and I, at the Ronald McDonald House, and Danielle's parents were watching our oldest Spurgeon at the time. And we got up and we took little Evie and we went up to the surgery center at All Children's Hospital. And a few of you perhaps were there. I know my brother Nate was there because I couldn't let my little girl go. And Nate thought that this would be a great photo op in that moment. Because I never cry. And I was crying. I was bawling like a baby. And my brother, Ever the artist, wanted to capture this, and I'm glad he did, because I look back on that from 8 years ago now, and I am reminded of the remarkably deep affection that I have for my little girl, for my daughter. And when I'm reminded of that, I'm reminded probably of the deep affection, humbling affection that Jairus has for his little girl. As he says to her, I'm going to get help, on the verge of death. And he, a synagogue ruler, has to humble himself and go to Jesus and say, please, please come, speak the word, do whatever you got to do, perform your magic. I need her healed. And the irony cannot be lost on us that here's a man who is leading Jesus through the crowds to save his daughter, and Jesus turns to a woman, a defiled, depleted, wrung out, pitted out woman who's been bleeding for 12 years, hasn't had a hug, hasn't had a handshake, nothing, has not worshiped with her people, has not been around her family. And what does Jesus say to her? Daughter. It's an intense term of intimacy and affection. And what does Jesus say to us? The picture is, at least in part, of me holding to my little girl, trying to safeguard her in an ill-sufficient way. And I think liberation comes in our lives as Christians. True worship comes. Genuine service comes when that picture fills our minds and our souls. No matter how hardened, no matter how American we are, when we realize the God of all creation, the God who fashioned Iran and Israel and America, the God who spun the planets in their orbit around the sun, the God who breathes life into humanity, the God who is sovereign over the Ayatollah and over the prime minister and over the president, that God cradles us in his arms, and he calls us daughter, son. Like there's immense relief in that. Because I know how I feel about my kids. And they frustrate me, and they disappoint me, and they vex me. But I'm pretty darn sure that no matter what they do, I will always love them. There will always be an ache of compassion in my heart for them. And yet, Scripture would say that all of our parental love is just a poor illustration of the depth of God's immense, intimate love for us. Can we be reminded of that? The woman reminds us of that. Jesus he's unhurried by all the social norms. He's unconcerned with social expectations. He doesn't seem to care that people are judging him. Why would you turn around and talk to this woman? Why would you concern yourself with the lowest, the cheapest, the most insignificant of these people? There are way bigger matters at hand. You know what this reminds me of? Because you look around the world, there are way bigger issues at hand than your life and my life. And this text just reminds me that while God cares about those issues, he also, with 100% of his undivided attention, cares about your issues and my issues. We're the woman. We're broken, and we're busted up, and we're alienated from God, as we saw last week, and Jesus turns around. And the final thing we see here is not only is he unhurried and unconcerned with the opinions of others, but Jesus himself makes himself unclean. in order to cleanse this woman. I mean, that's the idea. You have a lady here who has been bleeding for 12 years. The Pentateuch makes it incredibly clear that you cannot enter into the temple, and if you touch anyone, they become unclean. You touch anybody, even you brush up against their garments, now that person is unclean, and they have to go be ceremonially cleansed. But this woman, there's no cleansing for her. And so she brushes through the crowd, she's bumping up against people, she's probably wearing some type of disguise. She has, as the movies would show us, or The Chosen perhaps, she has a hood over her head because everybody knew everyone in these parts. They would have recognized her. She's the woman who's unclean. She has some type of issue, some type of disease. She can't be out in public. And so she's nudging up against people, every one of them now unclean. And she comes up behind Jesus, and it doesn't say it here in Mark. It just says that she touched this garment. But in Luke's gospel, much more specificity to it, and in Matthew's, which is written for Jewish readers, we hear something significant. She didn't just touch his clothing, she touched the edges, or that same Greek word for edges could be hem, as you might find in some translations, or tassels of his garments. You go back to Numbers chapter 15, and the Hebrew men are commanded to make these prayer shawls, which they still wear to this day. And on the edges of these prayer shawls, the corners, the hem of these, they're to weave on each edge 4 tassels, one on each edge. And these tassels were primarily made up of white linen, which would be easier to get your hands on in that day. The white symbolized purity. It was a reference to God's holiness as portrayed through his commandments. This is all in Numbers chapter 15, Deuteronomy chapter 6, Deuteronomy chapter 13, the 3 texts that make up the Shema, the holy prayer that Jews even to this day still utter in prayer to Yahweh. And so it reminds us of God's holiness as found in his commandments. There's 5 knots in every one of these tassels. The 5 knots are the law of God, the 5 books of the Torah, the Pentateuch, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, containing his laws, his holy laws. There's 4 spaces between these knots. Jewish people even today would tell you this is the 4 consonants of the sacred name of God that they will not utter, that we now realize and utter as Yahweh, because Yahweh is found in Jesus, the one who saves. And all of this to remind them again and again of God's perfection, that he is the one who's clean, not unclean, that he's the one who's holy, not unholy, that he's the one who's righteous and set apart. But something very interesting is also found in the book of Numbers, chapter 15, and that is that they are to weave among the white 1 strand of blue. Now, obviously, it has escalated since that time, but blue was an incredibly rare and precious commodity. The only way you could get blue in their day is to go north of Israel along the Mediterranean coast and find these crabs, and you would crush up the crabs, and for every 60 crabs you would crush up, you would get just the amount of ink, blue ink needed to make 1 of the blue strands and 1 of the tassels. Every Jewish man has to wear this. And it was a remembrance. We find this once again in Numbers and in Deuteronomy. It was a remembrance to them that there was a high priest, and the priest would wear what? He would wear robes of linen, and he would wear a tunic of blue as a representative before God of the people. And he was to proclaim peace to the people, and he was to proclaim forgiveness to the people, and he was to be a representative of the kingdom to the people. But he says in Numbers chapter 15, the priest is the priest. The high priest is the highest of priests on earth. But all of you, as part of my covenant community, are priests to your God. You will be a declaration of peace among the nations. You will be a representation of the holy God of covenants, of my commandments, and yet at the same time, while you observe my commandments, you will be constantly reminded through these prayer tassels that you're priests, ministers of reconciliation in the world. So the woman, probably with Micah chapter 4, verse 2 in her mind. Malachi chapter 4, verse 2. Malachi 4:2 says that the Son of Righteousness, talking about the Messiah, is going to come with healing in his wings. And that word wings in the Septuagint, the Greek rendering of the Old Testament, is the exact same word as edges, hem, or tassels. And so she would have understood that he will come as a true representation of God with healing in his robes, with healing as his person. And so she says, if I can just get up to him and can just feel the end of a tassel of his robe. I will be made clean. And what happens when this desecrated hands touch the clean becomes desecrated. Power goes out of him. Who touched me? And the woman's issue of blood stopped. All of her despair in an instant gone. All of her uncleanness in an instant gone. She is now able to come into the presence of the Holy One in the synagogue. She is now able to be around the covenant community because she has been made clean by the one who was clean and is now unclean for her. That's the whole point of the story. That he looks upon the desperate, that he looks upon the depleted, that he looks upon the diseased, the one who has absolutely nothing to offer. She's a woman, for goodness sake. And he says, who touched me? And he looks at her, and what does he say? Go in peace. Go in shalom. We understand this Hebrew word. Or they spoke Aramaic in the first century, so he actually says to her, go in shalom. That's the Aramaic rendering of peace. Go in shalom. Your faith has brought you to wholeness, to cleanness, to acceptance, from despair to liberation, from depletion to restoration. Your faith has done this. What does this mean to us? Well, it means that he sees us, that he understands what we're going through, that he calls us to exchange. It's the greatest of trades, to exchange all of our uncleanness for all of his rightness. This is the doctrine of imputation. This is that Jesus would look upon us and not infuse us with righteousness, but credit us with righteousness as he takes our unrighteousness from us. The one who has perfectly fulfilled the commandments of God, the one who is the greatest representation as the highest of high priests, now gives to us priesthood and acceptance and perfection positionally before him. We know this. I've talked about it before. I've talked about it pretty much every season of Lent. But on the cross, when Jesus died, satisfying God's wrath, cosmic justice met, sin atoned for, his sixth cry on the cross is, in the Greek New Testament, tetelestai, right? People get tattooed on their arms as well they should. It is done. It is accomplished. It is free. That's not the word he shouted out because he spoke in Aramaic. The word that Jesus shouted out as his sixth proclamation, just one word in Aramaic, is shalom. So it's the same word that he says to the woman here who has the issue of blood. He says to us now, go in peace. Go in peace. Because on the cross, the justice of God, wrath of God, and the mercy of God meet in the person of Christ. And there at the foot of the cross, so to speak, here comes our faith, a gift of the Holy Spirit, the means by which we are reconciled. And he says to us, go in peace. Your faith has made you whole. Your faith in me, in my finished work, has made you whole. Yesterday, I was hanging out with some friends, and before they met us for lunch, I was with my kiddos, and we were at the table. And I was asked this week by some friends who don't go to Redemption. They said, how do you disciple your kiddos? And I said, I'm going to be straight up with you. The way that I kind of do my family and my kiddos is more organic than organized. We don't really sit down for family Bible time. I feel like if you're looking for it, you can find opportunities everywhere to have these conversations. Every movie you watch, every book you read, every conversation, every question that's raised. And so nothing wrong with like organized times, but for us, the more organic approach works. And so we're sitting there. I've got the three kiddos, and Evie says something like, well, I do that because I'm a Christian. I'm like, okay, you're a Christian, which we've talked about before. But I'm like, you're a Christian. What makes you a Christian? So I want to make sure. I mean, our primary responsibilities. Now, somebody else asked me this week, they're like, hey, what's your greatest accomplishment in life? And I said, I think I want to believe that shooting even par. I'm just kidding, it's not that. My greatest accomplishment in life is that my kids. I mean, I know there's a responsibility and culpability that I have. I know that God is sovereign, but from a human perspective, I think it's that my kids like love Jesus and love church and like want to be around God's people. I think that's like, you win. That's it. That's awesome to me. And so we're sitting there at the table, and Evie says, well, I don't do that because I'm a Christian. She says something like that to Spurgeon, and I kind of wanted to correct that and be like, well, we still do things we shouldn't do as Christians. But instead I just went, hey, you're a Christian. What makes you a Christian? And Evie goes, trust in Jesus. which might sound so simplistic, but 9 out of 10 evangelicals in America, according to polls, even recent studies, get that answer wrong. It begins with, hey, something that we do. And she says, trust in Jesus. And Spurgeon speaks up and goes, we have to believe in our hearts that he came to earth and he lived perfectly for us and he died on the cross in our place and he rose again and he is our Savior. Like, that's it. And by faith in him, we hear presiding over our souls, shalom. Even in the midst of all this, there's going all this craziness everywhere. The word comes back to us, shalom. Peace. Go in peace. Live in peace. Exist in peace. Serve in peace. Worship in peace. I have become unclean. I have become unrighteous. 2 Corinthians 5:21, to gift you cleanliness, holiness, righteousness. Go in peace. You're fully accepted. God is just rushing. I'm just rushing to you again and again and again to remind you that in Jesus, by faith, you are accepted. You are affirmed. Yes, you sin. Yes, that grieves me. Yes, I don't excuse that. I don't just look at the woman's uncleanness and say, hey, no big deal. Instead, I deal with the matter at hand, the most pressing matter of her life, that which she's most desperate about. I deal with that. I become unclean. I become unrighteous positionally to gift you perfection. Now go in peace, live in peace, worship in peace, serve in peace.